that makes it good morning. I'm talking about FE today, the choices, challenges, and everything we face. Hope you enjoy the conversation.
Live from Derby, this is the Morning Break with Charlotte Marshall on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Hello, good afternoon. I can say good afternoon now because my laptop tells me it's 12:01. So I feel as though I can get away with saying good afternoon. And I realised the introduction today said good morning and it's morning break. This is technically not morning break. This is technically the lunchtime show. We have had a change. So I've moved it to later on in the afternoon so that I can get involved in something in the morning. So thank you for joining me. I can see people joining the studio already. And I'm super excited because I've managed to log on, not break anything. My microphone seems to be working. Everything seems to be okay. Let's see if we can keep that momentum going for the rest of today's show. So, good afternoon. What would be a really great start, as it's the lunchtime show, is where are you and are you on your lunch? Are you having your lunch? And maybe even what are you having for lunch? Maybe you could get in on board with telling me what you're doing at present. And if you're celebrating this Friday, are you excited about it being the end of tags? Hi from India, welcome. Are you just about scraping through? Are you hyper for the Friday, for the weekend? Or are you maybe on a little bit of a downward spiral, just need to get through to the end of today? So let me know where you're at as well in terms of your mindset and your mood. So, as always, I'm basing today on a little bit of research that I've done around social media, but I have expanded my horizons a little bit and gone a little bit more in depth. And I'm hoping that later on in the show, we might have a guest speaker, which would be particularly exciting, a guest on our show, which will be the first time. So this would be our first lunchtime show. It's actually my 6th show, but first lunchtime show. And it might be the first time that we get somebody to come on and talk to us a little bit about what it is that they do in FE. So the topic today is further education. And the reason that I was excited to talk about FE is it's where I work. It's my daily bread, if you like. But it's also a really exciting and diverse sector that often doesn't get that recognition of being a really exciting and diverse sector. And often we hear a lot of subjects or conversation around primary, secondary, universities sometimes, but FE, I feel, sometimes gets left out. So I thought we would dedicate today's show to talking about FE. So I hope that it's something that's you're going to find interesting, because it's where we send our students to. It's where a lot of them make the decision whether they're going to go on to university or whether they're going to go into employment, looking for those apprenticeships and moving into paid employment. So it is this really pivotal place within the education journey that a student goes through. So that's going to be our content for today, looking around FE. Thank you for those of you that have joined. It's good to see that more people are jumping on board for our conversation today. It's great to hear from you, always on chat, but again, feel free to phone in. It's always lovely to speak with people and get more information, more perspective about the different experiences and placements that people are on. So if you feel inclined, feel free to let me know on chat. Where do you currently work? What is your area currently? So are you in education? What aspect of education are you in? And is it primary, secondary, FE or HE? So that's our topic for today, and it would be really great to hear from more of you, whether that's on chat or whether that's you want to dial in and make a conversation, have a conversation with me rather, then that would be wonderful as well. So to start, I always start with a little bit of a Twitter review of what conversations or what feedback that we've had from Twitter based upon the questions for today. So it's a fairly shallow research pool, but it's a research pool that I engage with nonetheless. Because I often think that EduTwitter is such a massive space and there are so many different roles within education. and people are inspired and use EduTwitter as a support network. They use it as a sharing resources network, and this is hashtag EduTwitter, by the way. So it's really a space for people who have an invested interest in education. Now, more often than not, you see a lot of NQTs using the hashtag EduTwitter as building up that network of getting advice, of being supported. Maybe if their schools are not as supportive as they could be, then they go to EduTwitter, hashtag EduTwitter, to find that solidarity. And it can be a really positive place to be. There's also a little bit of judgment going on EduTwitter, but I think you probably get that in anywhere. Welcome, student, and also have your own YouTube channel. That's impressive. Well done you to managing both of those things. And I have to admit, tech is not my forte, so I could probably do with learning quite a lot. So thank you for contributing. Others, feel free to join in as well. So what is your invested interest? What is it about education? Where is it that you sit within education? What interests you about education? And thinking a lot around FE. So if you're in FE, what do you love about it? What are the challenges within it? One of the sections today, we're going to be looking at debunking the myths. So these assumptions that exist around being a teacher in FE, what are they and why have they perpetuated? What can we do to challenge them? Does it have a damaging impact? All of those questions are going to be part of today's show. So, from Twitter, my question was earlier this week, where do people teach? Because as I've mentioned, EduTwitter is massive. If you don't know hashtag EduTwitter, get yourself on there. It can be, as I've said, really supportive. It's where I met the founders of Teachers Talk Radio, and it's given me a fabulous opportunity to do lots of networking. So it is great. I'm a massive advocate. But then I also invited people to let me know where they taught, and if you were feeling generous, a myth about teaching in that place, because I don't think that it's just FE that has these myths, these assumptions, these stereotypes. I think that myths exist probably in all professions, actually, but especially in education. I'm going to say that we're talking to teachers. Teachers need to feel as though they're important today. So I feel as though there are lots of these myths. And I was a little bit surprised, because I have to say, as I'm sitting in an evening scrolling through Twitter, which I probably should be doing other things, but I do, is that I get distracted by quite how many primary school teachers there are, EYFS. And I love it. And I get a little bit jealous because they get to do lots of really fun things. But that's my perception, isn't it? That's immediately a myth, that everything in primary school is lots and lots of fun and it's lots and lots of games. But let me just check my statistics so I can see my pictures better today. I've set it up so that I can actually see the research that I've done, which is impressive considering, as I mentioned before, this is my 6th show. So only 3.8% of the people that engaged with my poll are from primary schools. So I did wonder if maybe those teachers are just a little bit more vocal. I'm not sure. No judgment there. maybe they don't get chance to communicate very often, so they find themselves on Twitter. 41% of the respondents were from secondary, and I would say that's probably a fair account. A lot of the times when we talk about asking for English resources, that it tends to be from a secondary level, and there are some great English resources, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. 52% of the respondents are from FE, so whoop whoop, they are all my target audience, or they're my immediate colleagues. Anyone in education is a colleague, I feel, but 52% of my Twitter people are from FE. And then this minor proportion of HE, so only 2.5%. were from HE. Now, the reason I did this is because as I go through a lot of work around, and on Twitter, a lot of the ideas around FE, I did start to wonder as to how often those conversations happen. So there seems to be a lot from primary school, celebrating the wonderful things they do in primary school. And there are a lot in secondary school talking about GCSEs. And obviously that's been really prevalent at the moment because of tags, and a lot on A-levels. But it tends to be that the A-level conversations that are happening on Twitter are still from secondary schools. And as someone who works in a college, I try and have those conversations, but there's something about the culture that's not quite the same. Awesome. Yay! Dan's available to call in. So do feel free to call in then, Dan. It would be lovely to hear from you. We are just chatting all things FE. So it would be great to have your viewpoint. Hopefully there's a call button. We used to have a sofa, and then the sofa no longer works. So I don't know what happened with that. So call in as soon as you like, and then we'll discuss more things on FE. Hopefully that will work. While you get that up and running, where I'm coming from today, so just there's loads of people all of a sudden joined the call, so no pressure. Oh, there we go. We're talking about all things FE. So we're looking at why people teach in FE, the myths associated with FE, what are the challenges of FE, so on and so forth. So hopefully, Dan, can you hear us? Are you able?
Yes.
Yay, and I can hear you. So look at that.
That was smooth.
I'm renowned for not being particularly good with technology. So the fact that this has worked is a massive win for me today. So if you don't mind, just start off by telling us a little bit of your background. So no pressure, but what's your setting? How long have you been in your setting? Just a little bit about you.
So I work in a general FE college, and I work on the teacher training aspect of it. But I first joined teaching in 2012, the same college. And I was a professional photographer before that.
So that's cool.
Yeah, it sounds better, doesn't it? As like, dinner party conversation or whatever. I mean, not that I go to those, but they say, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a professional photographer on a newspaper. They go, oh, that sounds really exciting. They go, yeah, I mean, once you've seen one pothole, you have seen most of them. I mean, there were really good things. I was in Scotland. I was working for one of their national newspapers. I did stuff for like, big sporting events, big news events, but lots of day-to-day stuff. And I just was driving from Yorkshire up to Scotland with my wife and thought, God, this is boring now, isn't it? So I literally Googled, around about where she was from, and sort of like, oh, there's an FE college with a photography job, right? That'll do. And I got that job really, and moved on to teaching maths, and now teaching teacher ed really. So lots of stuff.
That's amazing. And what a journey to go from professional photographer to teaching photography to teaching maths to teaching teacher training. That is quite a jump, isn't it? Is that what you expected? How do you find yourself in those positions?
I suppose the funny thing is that perhaps the photography was more of a aberration to begin with, because I did a social science degree at a university. Obviously, I then did a BTEC level 3 press photography course because I just wanted to be in newspapers. I still love newspapers. I'm really jealous sometimes, but only sometimes, when a big event comes on and things. But and I had done a bit of maths and stuff, but really what this highlights is actually that whole sort of, and this makes me sound like a real sort of banner holder, that kind of like lifelong learning thing is really important. I mean, I did a maths module on the OU, and I've traded very heavily on that to do maths teaching. Then the college support me doing an AS level, and done just constantly doing courses as a result. But I think that's kind of like one of the great flexibilities is that, because you're in an FE college, you can just pop, there's always someone there to help you when you want to do another qualification or whatever. And that does actually lead to a huge amount of doors opening. And that flexibility, I think, is a big deal in FE.
That's so interesting. And part of the research that I've been doing for today's show, I literally, similar to yourself, went to Google and went, okay, so why should I teach in FE? And of course, then all these adverts appear of, you should join it for this reason. And it was very persuasive. And as a lit teacher, I thought, wow, this rhetoric is very powerful. But one of the things that it was saying was the diversity of teaching in FE and the opportunity. So these opportunities do appear. So you did a social sciences degree. What happens when a social science A-level is available and they go, oh, right, okay, so you're qualified to do that. Did you fancy having a go at that? And then you find yourself teaching a whole other qualification. So it's amazing to have that depth and breadth of all this experience. So why teacher training then? But this is not an interview, by the way. I realize all of a sudden it seems as though I want all of your credentials and you must validate every answer. But how have you found yourself in teacher training? What do you like about it?
Well, I mean, some of it's accidental, as a lot of these things are. But I mean, I was essentially a manager within the sort of maths and English department for a bit, and I did I was doing my master's in education alongside that, and through various institutional instability, shall we say, that opportunity came up, and I thought, well, I didn't really expect to do this now, but I would like to do it in general, and you just best do it when the opportunity is there. So, I shifted across. The previous teacher ed team I had been taught by them initially, and they sort of were a great help in terms of moving it across. But the thing I do like about that is you still feel like you're managing a department, really, but it's slightly more fragile, if you like. You've got a lot of sort of very, because becoming a teacher is a really big thing, isn't it? You sort of like, can everyone remember the first time they had to teach 5 minutes, and there they were with a piece of paper sort of shaking in their hand going, oh my God, how am I going to get through this? And then
good
by the end of the
old-fashioned
course,
micro teach.
Yeah,
love it.
I know, but then we build those up, and then by the end of the year, they're running weeks at a time. They're like helping out all sorts of things. Often getting work in our college, if not further afield, and it's a great watching that process. Like sort of caterpillars and butterflies or whatever is really good. But I've also one thing they sort of think is everything has to be absolutely perfect all the time. And I say, well, look, here's my first lesson, and you can't go worse than that. So my first lesson was, I was helped out by some colleagues, and they said, all right, here, it's a photography lesson, and they said, right, here's some material, here's some slides, let's use these slides, it'll be fine. Now, unfortunately, this was a level 1 photography course, but we also ran these like little 5-week introductory courses as well.
Okay.
Well, guess what? It was common material used on both of these courses, and half the class had already seen it, and they stuck their hand up, arms folded, angry red faces, saying, we've already seen this.
Yeah, done this.
So, I just sort of went, right, well, let's just do the thing that I think will be good. And, it sort of worked out. But I think telling the trainees that, one, you've been in their seat, and two, if you change things, that's good. I think it's quite an important part of it, really.
Absolutely. I remember my mentor when I first started out, and I want to come back to this idea of training people who are effectively already teaching, because often when you're doing teacher ed for those who are professionals like yourself, so if you've been a professional photographer and then you're teaching a photography course, the chances are you're hired before you have your teaching qualification. So often what happens is they say, oh, okay, you're incredibly talented in the subject specialism, so we'll put you in the classroom and then we'll train you how to be a teacher. So it's almost as if we learn these things retrospectively sometimes, that you can come back to it. But I remember my mentor saying to me, lesson plan versus lesson do. And I've mentioned this on a previous show, because I was going, as a trainee, my lesson plan had to be perfect, and it used to be planned per minute. So this task was going to take 3 minutes, and I was going to speak for 2 minutes, and I would beat myself up if for whatever reason that didn't work brilliantly, because it had to be perfect. So I think perfectionism for NQTs, in fact for most teachers, is a real problem. It's something that bears down on us quite a lot. So has your experience been with your teacher training for those professionals that are coming in, much like yourself as the professional photographer, that are already in the classroom, and so you're almost back training, or do you get new and fresh faces that are taking on teaching for the very first time?
Well, so we have both. So the people are sort of obviously coming from one industry or another and have been employed by the college and then put onto our course. That's called the in-service route, and that's over 2 years. I find interesting is the sort of like, when you sort of introduce an idea, they often just instantly get what you're angling at and what's important. And also, I mean, one of the difficulties is because you've obviously got like, about half your class are from the college that you're working in, and half are from a dozen other institutions. So it's that balance of making it, yes, in-house training, but two, not making it exclusionary. Because if you just bang on about, college X's policies, it's completely irrelevant to half your group. But it's just sort of like highlighting, well, look, these are the things you can do in your classroom. These are the things that are supported by your college, or what do you think about how the college support these or not, etc. But yeah, we get a lot of, there's a lot of people coming in from industry, particularly from, like, say, engineering or joinery or whatever. And I think they actually, well, maybe they'll tell me this anyway, but they quite enjoy that whole sort of like process of actually thinking that it's what they're doing is right as opposed to random.
Yes.
Which, we've all been into a classroom, particularly in FE, because, as you say, a lot of people come in, they get the job and they train alongside it and they do, well, I think this is the right thing. So having a bit of a confirmation that it is right as opposed to just a guess is, quite important, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting because I think when I started my teacher training, I don't even remember what it was called when I did my teacher training. I think the name of teacher training has changed so much. But what I loved about it is that in those discussions, there was someone like myself who was training to go on to be an academic teacher. So they were training to do psychology at A-level. There was someone that was doing painting and decorating. There was someone that was doing bookkeeping on community courses. And so as we discussed these ideas, so pedagogy was presented to us, but then we would all say, well, how does it fit into my area? How would I make that piece of pedagogy appropriate for an A-level versus somebody else who's doing level 1 painting and decorating? And I loved that communication and that sort of swapping of ideas. So some staff members, and like you said, a lot of engineering, a lot of construction come in as subject specialists, not necessarily teachers. And so they have known how to train people up in business, but training versus teaching is a whole other conversation, isn't it? So I think that's a really interesting point that you've picked up. So thank you for giving us your background. I'm loving the fact that you've been not only professional photographer, photography teacher, math teacher, and now teaching teachers. I love that sort of, like I said, the breadth of it is wonderful. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about myths to debunk. And I know that you commented on my little Twitter comment before. So I've got a few. In fact, I've got 5 that we can go through if you're happy to chat those through with me.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So my first one is the one that I put out there at the beginning, because I say when I'm a teacher and they say, all right, where do you teach? And I say, oh, it's in a college, it's in A-level. And they go, oh, well, that's going to be really easy, isn't it? Students have picked their subjects and they're so excited and engaged all the time. You've got it easy. That must be a real pleasure to teach. And I find it really hard not to either burst out crying, burst out laughing, or want to punch them in the face just a little bit because teaching in A-level can be really challenging. This idea that because students have picked their subjects that I've got it easy is just bizarre, and I've no idea where it come from. Have you ever come across that conversation? Have you ever had that with somebody where they've gone, oh, you're teaching teachers, they want to teach, therefore you've got it easy, you don't have to worry about anything?
I mean, I more say that to the trainees when they make assumptions about their own students. And, I've effectively got a bingo card because, sometimes we have people come in and they say, oh, you must be so grateful you're working in FE because all your students have chosen to be here. And you think you need to meet level 1, whatever, really,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's obviously, well, I say obviously, it clearly isn't. It's the life is just so much more complex than that. And, even on A-level, because, even within like FE, you could say, well, yeah, level 1's going to be harder than teaching people on A-level because of this, that, and the other. Well, like, what if it's the third A-level to make up the choices? And they sort of went, oh, that'll do. I mean, we know that psychology and sociology are some of the biggest enrolling A-levels. And, well, I think some of the reasons for that is that they probably haven't done that at GCSE. It sounds quite cool.
Yeah.
And, guess some people think it'll be much easier than something else. And then they go, well, we're going to have research methods today and running experiments and dealing with all these, quite difficult sort of conversations and complex ideas. And, strange enough, that's rock solid.
Yeah, one of my best friends at work teaches on the psychology, and she has, like you said, the numbers that come in for psychology, and I've taught sociology, and again, the numbers are enormous. But she always starts the first few weeks by delivering some of the maths related aspects of psychology, and the numbers just drop. They just run for the doors because this idea that it's going to be easy, or like you said, sounds cool, or I'm going to go off and be part of CSI, or they've got this image of what psychology is, and you think you don't really realize how competitive the field is, but you want to harness the enthusiasm of those learners coming in, but also give them a real dose of reality. So it can be a real challenge to get that balance right. But these preconceived ideas of the students coming in of what their subject's going to be, and absolutely right. I teach, as you probably heard already, English literature A-level. And there's this concept that, oh, well, I like books, I like to read. And you think, a little bit more than just the fact that you like books. And I love that you love books. I don't want to take away from the fact that you love books, but we're not just going to sit and read for 5 hours a week. So it's a real interesting one. And I like the idea of maybe having to educate new teachers that there might be some kickback against your subject. And I know that when I taught English Resit at a college, I love English. I think it's an amazing subject. And so I walk in kind of going, yeah, this is the best subject ever, and happy to compete with the maths GCSE teachers next door. However, the student experience has been that they've not got their GCSE, which is why they're having to resit it. So they're not happy about being in my classroom. And anything I say, they'll go back to that. Oh, I've heard this before. I don't want to have to do it again. I've heard it before and I've already failed. And you're fighting that narrative all of the time. And that can be a real barrier to sort of building on. So when somebody says to me, oh yeah, but you've got it easy, I think maybe not. Following on from that, someone shared that they have heard this narrative of they are 16 and they've chosen to be there. You're so lucky never to have any behavior issues to deal with. And I find that one an interesting concept as well, that there's no behavior issues because they're over 16. Now, my immediate reaction to that is that a 14 and 15-year-old that maybe has a fight can do a lot of damage. We can amp that up when they're 17 and 18. So I'm not entirely sure that we are better placed if there's a behavioural issue. And obviously fighting is a significant behavioural issue. But what are your thoughts on that, Dan? What is your response to there are no behaviour issues in FE? You don't need to worry about behaviour issues.
Well, obviously, the vast majority is going to be a lot more sort of low-level non-compliance and also attendance as opposed to outright behaviour issues. But I think every one of my colleagues can point to, a hot flashpoint like you describe. Equally, there's been students that I've met and taught at 16 to 18. I thought, God, I bet you were a nightmare when you were 13 and you've just about calmed down. So you're sparky, quite fun to teach, but not going to kick off in quite the same manner. So I do think that there is an aspect to that. But there clearly is behaviour issues. And the thing I found most interesting is probably my most challenging students. And, I've taught adults at, GCSE level maths, and, I've done obviously the teacher ed, and I've done lots of other courses. My most challenging students have been adults, actually. And yeah, they haven't fought or whatever, but they have been like, very sort of, why are we doing this? I don't think that's the right thing to do right now. I've got an assessor's award, and true story. And, all this sort of stuff. And so, you do get quite a lot of, but then a lot of that's a bit of unease. And, once you sort of claim your authority, it's okay often. But yeah, and then a lot of online issues, you kind of like hear sort of like half conversations about what has been said via some sort of toxic WhatsApp group. And oh God, it's just the absolute bane, isn't it? But yeah, there are behaviour issues within colleges, absolutely, because, people don't suddenly change from like June to September.
Absolutely.
Of course it's there.
I find that really interesting because I would agree with you that often when I've taught on adult GCSE English, so mature students doing GCSE English so that they can get to access or they can get to university or whatever they need their GCSE English for, and even more so when their employers told them that they would lose their job unless they had GCSE English. That was a terrifying year. The behavioural issues were just as challenging in that those particular learners, and not in a nasty way, but they were very needy, and so their enrollment and their involvement in lessons was just as challenging as someone passively playing on their mobile phone. And I think at one stage I would happily have taken someone playing on their mobile phone compared to sometimes adult learners. And I don't know if you've experienced this in your teaching qualification, but teaching teachers can be a real nightmare. I think sometimes, they say doctors make the worst patients, and I wonder sometimes if teachers make the worst students. This idea of, well, why am I doing this? Why have I got to do? What are you trying to get across to me? What's the purpose? What's your goal? I think, gosh, maybe have a little bit more grace with this one. So next one was put forward by somebody else on Twitter. In fact, all of these I think are from Twitter. Are the fact that because students are going into FE and they're not staying with their school sixth form, that they're not academic. And this one I've not heard myself, so I was quite interested that this one had been put forward, that because the students going into FE that they're not academic. And this made me think that there's this assumption that if you're going into a college, it's because you intend to do a vocational course, and therefore it misses out the fact that there are so many courses at level 3 and above that are incredibly demanding, and they're somehow not academic. Now, I know a colleague of mine is listening to us today. So hi, Mel. And I'm really pleased that you're here to join us again. So thank you for joining us. And I know that she will have a very specific experience of this, because there's this concept that if you're at college, you're not good enough, or you're not as good as those that have maybe stayed at school, which is a real problem, because if you've got a BTEC level 3 course, it doesn't seem to carry the same respect that maybe other A-levels do. Now, as an A-level teacher, I feel really frustrated by this, that there seems to be this elitism around the A-levels, because I couldn't do some of the BTEC courses. I'm not equipped to do them, and there needs to be this respect. So I haven't heard this, that students in FE aren't academic. How about you, Dan? Have you ever heard that?
Well, I think there's everyone bangs on about the sort of vocational academic education divide and want parity with STEAM, and that's the whole sort of point of T levels. But I mean, I think I wonder how much some of the vocational students are actually interested in that debate, because it's always, nice, worthy people on Twitter that say, oh, it's not as good. And, I've done A levels and I've done a BTEC, and, I did the BTEC and got into sort of the exact job it was designed for. I think, it's worth people looking at what has happened on, say, BTEC level 3 engineering or construction, because I can tell you now for sure it's rock solid, having, been in those lessons. So I do think that is an issue, but and people, I suppose, some of that is actually like going against that choice mantra, isn't it? Because first up, you're saying, well, they've all chosen to be there, and then secondly, said, well, they've all been kicked out somewhere else. That's why they're there.
Yeah.
So which is it? Yes, it's a combination. And I mean, personally, for example, I had a trainee who came into our college on level 1. Health and social care or something in that area. And by the time she came to me, she'd gone all the way through and done a degree and, been a completely different person. By all accounts, a complete nightmare when she was at school. But it just took her that chance. FE gave her that chance to actually go, you know what? They aren't the enemy. And it might have took a little while, but now she's a practicing teacher, and I suspect can probably teach that kind of exact group of students far better than, someone like me could,
Yeah, absolutely. In doing a little bit of reading around this, one of the things when at the end of the show, I was hoping to go through why do we teach in FE? And I think a lot of students that have chosen to move to an FE setting, so not just a sixth form attached to the school or a college nearby, but those that have actively moved into a different forum, are looking to not carry the stigma that they've built up over the school year. So often they've got known as the difficult one, perhaps for one thing they said in year 8, and then that's become their label, and then that becomes the person that they act out, self-fulfilling prophecy, as much as you want to get into it. So often I think that students come to FE looking to be able to drop all of that baggage, all of that association, and it is a fresh start, which I think can be really good. It can be a real challenge for students coming in because they don't necessarily know how to do that, but definitely one to watch as well. So thank you for your input on that. 2 left, and then we're going to go to the news, and hopefully you'll stick with us to carry on this conversation. But the next one, this gets me every single time. Working in FE, you get all of the holidays of the school. No, we don't. It really drives me nuts. I have an allotment, and I have restricted time when I can take that allotment. So it's not even as if automatically, oh, it's the school holidays, you're off. No, I'm back in work this week. That really does frustrate me. How about you, Dan? Are you in a place that you get all of the holidays?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a mantra, and I've had the same people say it to me every single year, and they go, no, I'm in until this point. I'll have 3 weeks leave. I would say I have the X amount of days leave. These are when I can take it. These are when I can't. And in a lot of ways, there's the sort of the rules around the leave for at my place at least are very similar to say what I had at the newspaper. Yeah, it's a bit more flexible, but you don't get the same. That's for sure. But also, frankly, everyone knows what the holidays are for teachers or FE. So I do say to sometimes I go, well, it's not some sort of industry secret. Come on in. I could get you teaching level 3 business within about 2 weeks. In your come. And, it's it's not a surprise.
Why have I never used that strategy? That is awesome. That idea of, you really like the fact I have lots of holiday, join me. That's brilliant.
What do you work in? I could have you signed up teaching this within about a fortnight. There's definitely a vacancy.
That is a brilliant response. And then I think that maybe the reaction might be different. And last one that kind of connects is that FE gives you the best work-life balance. It's the best place to be an educator for a work-life balance. I think that generally there are stresses wherever you go, so I'm not sure we can categorically say that FE is a safe space. But what are your thoughts on that? FE offers a better work-life balance.
Well, I haven't worked in the other ones, so I couldn't really comment. But I think every single teaching work balance will have ebbs and flows for sure. I mean, at the moment, I'm on the call with you, so I can't pretend I'm super busy right now. But I have done, I've just finished moderation for my qualification and so on. But I know for a fact that within English and maths, with all the teacher assessed grades, you had teachers making sure they had all their grades prepared for all 150 of their students, just in case, to make sure it's an authentic grade for sure, make sure it's rigorous, then it's standardized, and 3 of them go to the exam board or whatever. So there's plenty of times I've been doing something till super o'clock in the morning. But I mean, to be fair, I can't imagine working in primary is going, I suspect that is very closely monitored. It's very sort of, there's a huge amount of work in primary, and then secondary again. Think of those timetables, think about the different age groups you're teaching across the whole time. FE similar, all right, they're 16 to 68 or whatever, but I've taught entry level subjects, and I've taught sort of degree level stuff within the same day and things. And I think actually, like, a lot of the sort of foundation level stuff is extraordinarily difficult, because you think, how am I going to get this so it A, looks new, and as an explanation, B, there's a bit of success out of something they've never had success in before, or at least they don't view themselves having success in. So yeah, the workloads ebb and flow with all teachers, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And I think that, as you've said, I think there has to be that degree of flexibility. And again, in that research today, it was saying that FE offers you this fabulous flexibility. And a little bit of me laughed. And then I thought, well, there are instances where, for example, September is always so stressful, so intense, really difficult to stay on top of everything. But then you find your pace. And I would always say this to new staff members coming in, that yes, September is going to be really scary. It's very busy. You might be working late on a lot of occasions, but then, the pressure eases off at different points. So I think we have to have that whole year perspective. And as you say, in fairness, I hadn't thought about the teaching a year 7 class and then teaching a GCSE class and switching between those successively. That must be a real nightmare, that idea of moving between and accepting your audience has changed and how you respond to that, so to speak. Really interesting one. Thank you so much for your contributions. You are very welcome to stay. If you would like to stay on the call, please feel free to do so. But we are now going to go to the news by Megan Goods. So that one's coming up next for us, folks. So see you in a few minutes. We're chatting about all of the things to do with FE. So why you're in FE, the myths associated with FE, all of those different aspects. But right now, let's go to the news.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk radio news. It's One Britain, One Nation Day today, an event supported by the Department for Education in order to help children learn about shared values of tolerance, kindness, pride and respect. The campaign is coupled with a song titled Strong Britain, Great Nation, which Gavin Williamson has encouraged schools to use for sing-alongs today as part of the patriotic celebrations. In an interview with LBC, the man behind the original campaign said, "What we're trying to do is create a sense of unity and pride. Schools have got to champion certain values now, and it's a question of championing those values which make our kids wonderful citizens of our nation. Respect, love, kindness, and understanding." In a speech to university sector leaders, Gavin Williamson ascertained that certain practices, such as lowering of literacy standards in degree assessments, are unacceptable and must come to an end. Williamson was referring to university offers that do not require students to have acquired their GCSE in English and Maths, stating that if a graduate begins a job without basic literacy, this serves no one, not them, not their peers, not the employer, and not the nation. It undermines the value of a British honours degree. High standards are the bedrock of which our university's reputation rests, and they must be maintained. That was your latest Teachers Talk radio news.
We'll pause it there before I let it go on again. Boomer's back in the room, so you know who you're with on a Friday when I pressed the wrong button at the wrong time. Welcome for those of you that are joining us this Friday lunchtime. We are chatting all things FE. So it's often known as the Cinderella subject, the Cinderella site, as it's not considered, it's often forgotten, it's often left without funding, but I'm not going to get into the political realms of that. So far, we've been chatting about the myths that exist around FE, including things along the lines of students have chosen to be there, so they love every minute, right the way through to you get all of the holidays, so it's the best place to work and it gives you the best work-life balance. I'm joined today by Daniel Phillips, who's talking about his experience, who has been a professional photographer, maths teacher, photography teacher as well, and now teaches on the teacher ed courses at his site. So we've got a lot of different insights, and thank you for those of you that are leaving chats and comments as well. Do feel free to join in the conversation. So moving on to our next part, it's still about FE, it's still about working in FE and the expectations. But when I put my little shout out to the EduTwitter community, which is a fab community, some of the questions were answered about the myths that they've experienced that we've been chatting about already, but there were also a couple of others around just general comments that I thought, well, that's worthy of mention and would be really good to talk about, but not necessarily a myth. So one of the ones that was mentioned is that secondary is not worse than primary, tertiary is not better than secondary, all have their own pros and cons. There was another one that I thought was really interesting, is that someone says, I'm a teacher, and then they say, oh, do you teach primary? I love that. I love the assumptions that people have. So next question to you, Dan, is do people assume the teach that you course? So what do people, if you said I'm a teacher, what do they automatically assume that you teach? Have you ever had that experience?
I don't know, maybe I just quickly say I teach at a college, or people presume you're in a school because obviously, well, there's lots more of them. But I think more than that, there's sometimes in FE, people don't like calling themselves teachers. They like to say, oh, I'm a tutor, or I'm a lecturer, or whatever, so I think that could be quite a funny thing. And, I personally, I think there's a lot of confusion when people say, oh, I'm a tutor, because, well, for me, that means one-to-one support kind of thing, and I've even had confusing emails as a result of that. People getting mixed up as to what was happening, particularly with the COVID tutor stuff happening. And confusing things. And also, frankly, some ways, whenever you see a job that's advertised as tutor rather than teacher, it's sort of like, well, the terms aren't quite what you would expect, I would suggest, and the job will be the same. So I think, that's one of those sort of like little discourse things you have to be quite mindful of when you're sort of looking at work in the sector.
That's a really interesting one. Last week we were chatting about this label that people use when they sign off their emails. And so I would love, in a perfect world, to do lots of different studies into the quibbles of teachers. But those teachers that sign their email signature as teacher of whatever subject it might be, tutor of whatever subject it might be, versus lecturer of. Now, I don't think I would ever be in a position to confidently introduce myself as an English lecturer. Somehow I would then think the assumption straight to university. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Is how we assign ourselves. And I don't know. I think I start maybe by introducing myself as teacher. And then they say, what do you teach? English literature. Oh, GCSE? No, A-level. So you've got that conversation straight off. So starting with I'm a college teacher is probably the more efficient response to it. So you're probably doing better than I am. And then another comment that came in, and I thought this was really interesting, is more aimed at the non-teaching world, is that teenage boys are not scary. They are just children, even when they are bigger than you. And I have to admit, I am only 5'2", so a lot of my students are a lot taller than me. And there are some young men that come into FE that are 6 foot, 6'2", 6'3", and they do tower over me. But it's interesting that, again, this assumption is that those young men, women who are a certain side, like look a certain way, are to be feared. And I thought that spoke largely to community as a whole, not necessarily specifically for FE. But again, do you have anything around that? Or has that been in your experience, Dan, where it's assumed that teenage boys or the young men that you work with are scary? Do they have an extra barrier to overcome?
Well, I might have a different experience because I am 6'2" as well, but or thereabouts. Although I don't really have a stature to back that. But I think, it very much depends. Isn't it? I think sometimes it's more like assumptions around areas within a college as opposed to one sort of, a particular student or whatever. No, I don't think I necessarily get that, but yeah, sorry, I'm waffling now.
No, that's okay. I was thinking as you were chatting that it maybe goes back to that preconceived idea that there are no behaviour issues in FE. So we have to challenge a number of these assumptions, don't we? That, well, there are behaviour issues in FE, but it's not always boys. Sometimes girls can be worse. And I don't think it's gender specific. I think it's person specific where the behaviour issues come from. But I think boys do have a lot of stereotypes to overcome. And I think this one, the comment that kind of came from Twitter, where it was saying that they wish they could get across to the non-teaching world, that teenage boys are not scary. They are just people. And they said children, but they are people. And who are there to learn? Even if they are bigger than you, even if they present as quite aggressive or quite surly, they are still there and they are to be treated as people. So I think that that's an interesting one to try and get your head around.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things there is like it sometimes takes a while, but the thing I like about FE, or at least how it hopes to be, is that like you sort of try to treat them more like an adult and more saying, look, I'm not really here to tell you off in quite the same way. I'm not going to be, we don't have school uniforms, so we're not going to be saying about all your tie and all this kind of stuff. And actually, we really are on the same side. School teachers have the exact same thing, but I think, the younger teenagers, it probably takes them a long time to get their head round. Actually, you're not the enemy. And I have had the odd class when I haven't been able to act in that manner, and I've actually said to them, the thing that annoys me about this class, guys, is that I'm feeling like I'm having to resort to exactly the sort of behaviour your secondary school teachers did, which you hated. So look, we can go down that route. That's fine, but let's not pretend that's what either of us are looking for. And I think it does take a while for someone to actually get their head around, well, now I'm going to do it. And there's a funny thing. Sometimes like you see, I don't know, around February time, I feel what happens, but you see like, you just see a few people in your class just suddenly switch on and they say, oh, I've just done this and I'm not talking about teacher ed here. I'm talking about maths and all the rest of it, sort of like, oh, I've done this from home. What do you think? Or what about those extra classes? I'm not going to say in front of everybody else, but tell me more about it, you know? And that's one of the funny things,
That's so interesting. I'm going to segue neatly into the next part, which I wanted to chat about in terms of how we approach our learners in FE, because as I've mentioned, we do often sit as this buffer. So we are the place where students might be trying out something before making an actual decision on where they're going to go next. So for example, like you've said, psychology is a high grossing subject because they've never heard of it, they want to give it a try, they're really engaged with it, and then they realize, no, not for me. And so we've got this set of students who have been told, or dangerous to say, conditioned to behave in a certain way, that they have to sit and be quite quiet in their classrooms perhaps, or they have to wear their uniform, they address their teacher as sir or miss. And so they get to university, get to FE, and it's very, very different. The culture is very, very different, but they are still that person that they have been raised within the education setting and forum. So there's a lot of those sort of old habits to maybe break. And I know in September, for incoming students, there is this, do I need to write the title and the date? And well, that's entirely up to you. Would you like to write the title and the date? I don't have a title for this session, but you can write the title and the date if you like. And I laugh at that in a gentle fashion, because that has been my experience, where students have been cushioned or been told they have to do things in a certain way. So then they get to FE and they're not quite sure of what the barriers are, because we do try to treat our incoming A-level students as more adult learners, but they're not yet adult learners either. So they're in this really bizarre grey zone. And then furthermore, there are some teachers that are my colleagues that work in the same site as me that treat those 16-year-olds as pre-university. So I've been having a conversation this week of, do we talk or teach to our students as post-school, recognizing that they are breaking all of these shackles of that education system? I'm not saying that education system is bad. I'm just saying that this is often the behaviors that need to be in place for conducive to learning. But we then start to break those a little bit. So talk to me as Charlotte. I'm Charlotte, not Miss. And you do get, for maybe the first 3 weeks, where they say Miss, oh no, Charlotte. And you go, it's okay, I see us as peers. This is a learning environment. I'm not Miss to you. We're just all going through that process. It's much more collaborative, because it can be. And like you've just said, often a word as far as, oh, you know what, folks, I'm beginning to have to be class teacher. Neither of us really want us to have this. So how do we make sure that we get the behavior that is respectful, which is professional? But you're asking learners to do that who haven't worked in a professional environment. So they don't have the experience. They only have the experience of a school environment. So that can be a really tricky pathway, or a really tricky balance to really get your head around. And I agree, I think maybe February time we do have this change in attitudes, especially within the second year. So I always imagine my first years as post-school students and my second years as pre-university students, but I wonder if maybe there's a danger that they never get to be FE students, because they're either moving away from school environment, cultures and ethos, and then preparing for universities sort of settings and seminars and lectures. So what are your thoughts on the way that we approach our learners in that capacity? So do you approach them in that mindset of cushioning their transition from school into FE? Or do you start with, you're going to university, or their expectation is you're going on to, so I need to start preparing you for the next environment immediately?
Well, I suppose it's a sort of a classic example of that sort of de-scaffolding, like we sort of talk about in lessons, but that's the same with like behavioral norms, isn't it? And like that level of independence. I mean, there's even I've got a quote for it, obviously, because I'm sort of a teacher ready person, but there's one of the sort of textbooks has something around like, not expecting independence too soon. And like often I think we have students, Have you ever had like students at the end of the course and you think, oh, I really wish I had this student, but in September? And I think what you actually forget is that that's actually a big process. And again, I sort of like, I suggested that there was a student that I've had before who was like really sparky, and you thought they were probably a nightmare when they were 14. And by the time she had left her course, she'd got herself an apprenticeship in a photography studio or something like that. And she was like really like sort of, it was no longer sparky and back chatty, but, professional and assertive. And that transition only happened because it was told, well, that isn't actually what we're looking for here from you. That isn't acceptable. And so that kind of thing does have to take place. And, that's obviously she was perhaps quite a different group to the students you're talking about, like your A-level students and stuff. But it does take a lot of time because, for example, in my own A-levels, there was a point where, I was in a very structured A-level environment where we had like study periods outside of our lessons. Not everyone has that. But, I wasted them for the first 3 or 4 months. Then I realised I knew nothing about my A-level history. I thought, oh, God, I'm going to have to actually use it properly, aren't I? But it took that process and holding students account, and also that kind of thing being a lot more open-ended. You've got a lot more time to yourself to pick what to do and what to revise and what to look at. But structuring that and giving the students the sort of that self-regulation, but holding to account, I think it's a tricky business. It's a tricky business, because we've all seen students who just don't do any work at all, but we've seen others that do that well, and I think that sort of raising to that bar is a difficult ask.
And then maybe even the other extreme of students that are working every minute of every day, because going back to, I know you said before that you've dealt with people who are perfectionists, and often trainers or trainees are the ones that need everything to be absolutely perfect and are terrified that if it's not. I know that a number of students that I've come into contact with over the years are almost the other level. So you've got definitely the wasting of the study period, and I've definitely done that as well. You've got those that realize after a period of time, and like you said, you need that period of time, the awakening, if you like, to appreciate that, no, this study period is a gift. I need to use it appropriately. But then you have the other extreme where I've had to tell learners, maybe you just need a night off. Maybe you could do something fun today. Maybe you want to do something different. So it is. And I do think there's that aspect, is like you've said, of a teacher in FE becomes the role model for professional life. So we've, in your instance there, where you've got that student that, yes, would have been sparky, maybe a bit backchatty, maybe sassy at the beginning of the year, and then by the end of the year, much more assertive. And I love that the differentiation between sassy to assertive, because assertive is still very powerful and needed, but they need to see that they can use what they've got and celebrate their attitude, their character, their personality into a workplace. But then that's where teaching in FE becomes maybe broader, and I'm potentially going to offend lots of listeners today, and I know that Tom's listening as well, so I feel like there might be some messages later telling me that I'm maybe off kilter a little bit. But in FE, it feels as though the list of responsibilities of an FE practitioner is much bigger, and I'm saying that knowing that I'm going to get hate mail, because you've got to transition the student not from just a set of classroom expectations that they've had for 5 years in one school, one setting, but you've got to show them that some of those need to be maintained, but equally they need to find themselves, their personality, where is it going to get them to, and you have to handle all of those changes as a practitioner as well. What do you think?
I would be hasty to say that it's bigger than elsewhere, but I suspect, perhaps there's plenty of students who go through that within secondary, and, we sort of barely notice that. We don't notice that because it's already been achieved. Whereas there's, another group again who have still to have that happen. And, it's can be a struggle for them. But yeah, I think that's the thing that probably surprises my trainees and anyone new to profession far more. There's, I think, I'm not just actually here to teach X. I'm actually here to enforce quite a lot of norms and quite a lot of expectations around, adulting or something. And just those sort of those general behaviours and that sort of, all the things from very formal safeguarding to more things like, well, when you do this in class and, that ends up being a huge distraction, that's actually a big problem long term, I think there's, I think a lot of people think, I'll just go in, I'll teach this thing, I'll do a lovely job of it, and that's the end of it. Whereas really, a lot of the work with your students is kind of like outside that classroom in a way. It's kind of like assessing their work, giving them the feedback, sure, but it's all those emails of, oh, do you think I could get this job, or do you think I could do this, or
absolutely.
Like university applications is a really good one for that, isn't it? Because it's a big deal. There's literally 200 universities to apply to.
That was literally my thought. So you took the words straight out of my mouth in the UCAS applications, the job references, the character references. Yeah, so I do think that this, and I know that Tom, this is something he has spoken about in his own show. In fact, I think it was a show that I phoned into, is that the role of the teacher, if we try to define exactly what it is to be a teacher, it's not just the imparting of knowledge from one person to another. And I would have an issue with banking education anyway, but there's that much bigger experience. So as a trainer of new teachers, that must be a real eye-opener for them, that they've got all of these other expectations that they have to fulfill or that they have to complete as part of their job role.
Yeah, and I think they find it really difficult, one is, my students is, they'll have, especially with the more online stuff we've had these last 2 years because of COVID, I do find that that sort of broken down the barriers of when people email you. Like, my wife works in FE as well, and we've both had messages all weekend and all nights, and I think there's plenty of people will say that they've had a message at 2 a.m, they strange enough haven't replied, and then by 7 a.m they've got another message from that same student and things. And I do think that I think the trainees finds if they have a student that effectively attaches themselves to them, they find that really quite difficult to handle, really. And they do speak to me about it, which is the important thing, and say, you are allowed to not actually reply straight away. This is not some sort of expectation, because I think often, like you said about the student who sort of works himself into the ground, and you ask for a 2,000 word essay or a 1,500 word, and you get 4,500, and you go, well, actually, that's not only too much, but actually that's the completely wrong thing to do, and kind of balancing that. But it's the same kind of like that overworked culture, because if you if you look at the sort of mantra of teaching and the sort of the signaling of it, nothing's ever quite good enough, isn't it? There's always something else you can do. It's like, the question's always, well, what have you done to support that student? And if you take that very literally, that's a very maximalist statement that you can never quite live up to, because there's always something that a student could message me, and there's always something I could be helping the student with, but sometimes they might have to do it themselves, mightn't they? So
yeah, absolutely. I've said this about people who use writing frames, and I'm not taking away from writing frames. If that works for your subject, then that works for your subject. But at some point, like you said before, stabilizers have to come off, and the student has to take that responsibility. Similar experience. I had a GCSE student, and again, adult learner, who got pregnant. She found out she was pregnant in the November, I think it was. And so she said that she needed to drop out of her GCSE English course because, unsurprisingly, she was preoccupied. And the SLT at the time just said to me, well, what are you going to do to support her to make sure that she can stay on the course? And I thought, well, she's pregnant. I can't give birth to the child for her. What kind of question is that? So going back to your idea of what support and the implications that can have, because as you've quite rightly pointed out, there's always extra, but at some stage the support might be that I've let this learner work out for themselves how to problem solve that situation. And I would absolutely agree that during the pandemic, I feel as though teachers have been incredibly accessible, and not necessarily for the benefit of either student or staff. So that's another issue to consider. I've got a couple of other points that I want to talk about in our today's show, but before we get on to that, we're going to listen to the news. So we're going to go back to the news, and thank you so much for everyone that's joined the session today. It seems to be really popular, so I'm really happy to have this Friday lunchtime slot. So welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. We're talking all things FE. We're going through the choices, challenges, the myths, and everything else associated. So do feel free to message in with where you teach, maybe what subject that you teach. Are there any myths about education that you have to fight off regularly, or do you just smile and nod and be really, really gracious? I think I've got past that point. So that's where we're at today. We'll head over now to some adverts and news.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts, or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TTRadio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. It's One Britain, One Nation Day today, an event supported by the Department for Education in order to help children learn about shared values of tolerance, kindness, pride, and respect. The campaign is coupled with a song titled Strong Britain, Great Nation, which Gavin Williamson has encouraged schools to use for sing-alongs today as part of the patriotic celebrations. In an interview with LBC, the man behind the original campaign said, "What we're trying to do is create a sense of unity and pride. Schools have got to champion certain values now, and it's a question of championing those values which make our kids wonderful citizens of our nation: respect, love, kindness, and understanding." In a speech to university sector leaders, Gavin Williamson ascertained that certain practices, such as lowering of literacy standards in degree assessments, are unacceptable and must come to an end. Williamson was referring to university offers that do not require students to have acquired their GCSE in English and Maths, stating that if a graduate begins a job without basic literacy, this serves no one, not them, not their peers, not the employer, and not the nation. It undermines the value of a British honours degree. High standards are the bedrock of which our university's reputation rests, and they must be maintained. That was your latest Teachers Talk Radio News.
Isn't that so interesting, this idea of it must be enforced, that coming back to the pressure and the expectations and of the role of the teacher in the classroom and making sure that we produce the very best citizens that we possibly can is really potentially controversial because that very much puts the pressure on the practitioner, and that's something that we've been chatting about today. So thank you so much for joining me on this Friday lunch. Feel free to let me know what you're munching on, what's getting you through to the end of the day, and whether you're excited about the fact that it's Friday and that you're excited for the weekend, or if maybe you're just crawling through to the very last moment and then it's going to be a lot of rest and recuperation over the weekend. During that, we've had a question in from Mel. So hi Mel, it's good to see you in here again. Do you think, by the way Mel, I actively just waved at my laptop, completely aware that you can't see me, but I do believe that that's where we're at the moment. Feel free to have a giggle at my expense. Do you think you teach your subject differently depending on your setting? So, for example, teaching A-level in an FE college as opposed to a school. That, I think, is a really interesting question. I'm going to come to Dan Phillips, who's chatting with us today about all things FE about that. From my perspective, I think it's going to depend very much upon the culture of the place. So, and I think a lot of the way that I would teach it would be restricted perhaps by the attitude or the school itself or the site itself, and maybe there's not quite so much choice. So I think that I would behave differently in a school because of the expectations of the school versus I would in an FE college because of the expectations of the FE college. What do you think, Dan? Do you think you teach your subject differently if you were in a different site? I know you've said that you've not been in a school, but generally your experience, what do you think?
Well, I think a lot of these things are influenced by the culture of the place and their expectations, you know. So, I mean, I think we're going to need callers in to say who worked in both for it to be a fair test, to be fair. But, you know, like, I think there's plenty of places that feel like, they're very much performance led and they're very much holding the students to account. And they are also about like, well, look, we will decide if this is the right place for you within that first 6 weeks of term, because if you stay on after that, you will affect our performance figures, which is a thing. But so I suspect that it's very different. I mean, I know some FE colleges no longer teach A levels because, well, they've effectively haven't been able to recruit enough students to it. They've withdrawn from that market share, if you like. So this system is fracturing along different providers. So it is, it might be independent sixth forms or sixth forms within FEs versus, like school sixth forms. But, I'm sure everyone can point to examples in lots of different directions on that front. But I do get the impression a lot of independent sixth forms are very much like, they do view themselves as, like quasi-university institutions. And, I've been to sites and they almost feel like corporate bank headquarters. They're hugely impressive buildings. And, I can't say whether that's different to schools, but, I think they do have very clear expectations, that's for sure.
That's a really good point. As a caveat, I have taught in schools, but we are talking 10 plus years ago. So I don't think, like you said, you would need somebody to represent both perhaps to be able to get a really valid discussion going on this one. But like you've said, I think that there's a need almost to be seen as the quasi-university. So as I was saying in the previous portion of the show, do we approach our learners as post-school leavers or do we approach them as pre-university candidates? And often with the independent sector, with the sixth form college delivering FE that is separate to a school system, there is this desire to amp up the professionalism, and there's this desire to present themselves as a business that I think they're hoping then permeates into the student attitudes and values, that they're not going to have those low level disruptive behaviors that we were chatting about before because they're in the professional environment. But we then have this vicious circle of, well, those learners have never been in a professional environment, so how do they know what's expected of a professional environment? It becomes really problematic really, really quickly. But thank you for your take on that. It's really, really useful. We've got one more section, which is why do we teach in FE? So generally, I feel as though you've made your way there because of a career first. So we have professionalism first, and then teaching tends to be almost a, oh yeah, I could do that. So we tend to have that within FE, especially with, as we've said, those moving from, say, construction or from other aspects of our society that then become teachers, and then we have the back training that takes place. But I did put this question out again onto Twitter, which seems to be my happy place, in that I asked, so why then? Why is it that we teach in FE? What are the joys about teaching in FE? And there was quite a few responses to that. So I was really, really pleased. But some of them, again, I thought was quite interesting. So not having to deal with detentions. So there are no detentions in FE. And I feel like that could maybe be a myth that we have to debunk. And not having to be involved in break or lunch duties. I'm pretty happy about that one. I must admit, when people put pictures on Twitter of being on break duty and being on break duty during the rain and being on break duty when it's windy, and I think, yeah, I'm really glad I don't have to do that. But I also kind of feel it's a trade-off. So based on those two things then, Dan, not having to deal with detentions, not having to be involved in break or lunch duties, are that good reasons to be in FE?
Well, I suppose so, but it's probably not going to be the deciding factor.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, you could probably point to me having a lack of originality because my mum worked in FE. But I think that the whole idea of sort of working, at that sort of level 3 I mean, I've never taught A levels, which is a real shame. But that sort of like teaching those sorts of that kind of level of stuff has always appealed to me in a way that like teaching in a school never has. Always feels. I think I would struggle with the regimented nature. I mean, I did actually have a job interview for a school a while ago, and it was like, the electronic gate shut at this time, and you have to tab in and tab out. And I thought, well, if that's the time for the students, I mean, I bet you there's 6 a.m. meetings for the managers and things like that. And, lots of uniform enforcement. And you know what? If you're going to have a uniform, you do have to enforce it. You do have to have rules, but I'm not sure I have the energy for that. But, I do like that sort of, one person's dynamism or dynamic environment is another person's chaos, isn't it? But I don't mind it. I like that sort of creative kind of like almost a bit messiness sometimes. And I do like the seeing students come do something with you and think, right, I'm off to university now. Or I had students who went off to teach in Japan after my course. It's like, you're doing a better life than me. This is better. It's good to see, isn't it?
Yeah, you're not allowed to be more successful. You're not allowed to be more interesting than me.
Well, it's not difficult, but it's I just sort of, I suppose I've always associated that sort of tertiary level stuff. I think I went to a lot of schools actually, and then I've done sixth form, proper, like a sixth form within my school. Went to university, then went to an FE college to do a course. I did find that very different and very odd at first, but I can see with every single aspect of our system, I can see how it can work really well, and probably for different groups of students. I've had students come in, really struggle with school and absolutely flown in FE because of a change in their own attitude. But that's good.
Yeah, and I think we were chatting about this earlier on in our show today, the idea that students can often see moving into FE as a clean break. So like you've said, they've not necessarily had the space to develop in the way that they needed. They've not necessarily had that freedom as such to be able to be as creative as they would like to be. And I think that does make a difference. I do like having students, and this sounds really mean, but come in and kind of go, so how does it work here then? What are we supposed to do here? And to be able to stretch themselves and go out of their comfort zones and be a little bit brave, I do really enjoy that. For me, one of the best things about teaching in FE has to be the ability to have that rapport with the learners. I know you mentioned it before about behavior issues and managing those low-level behavior where you just kind of have to give a nod of, well, you remember how we really like this as a collaborative experience? Remember how it was really good that I don't have to tell you off? I'm kind of heading in that direction. I think that as a management strategy for a classroom environment is brilliant, but the rapport I have with the learners, and again, that opportunity I do. You know, there's an expression that in thinking that we are all equal, there's not a hierarchy of thinkers. You can't be a better thinker than somebody else. And especially with literature, because it is very much about what we think about the text, what the texts inspire, it's great that I'm able to have a equal discussion with those learners. So I actively encourage that. So that's another couple of reasons for me to be in FE. One of the things you mentioned in the response to Twitter is what I would like you just to spend a couple of minutes chatting to us about, is the fact you said it was easier to get into FE from a career change. Obviously that's been your experience. Is that what you see the most of when you're teacher training?
Well, I suppose what I was sort of saying with that is that my route was, there was a job as a learning advisor. I got that. I took a monstrous pay cut because it was only 0.5, so it was 2.5 days a week. But as soon as I landed there, I just sort of peddled my wares and sort of, look, I can teach maths. What was that? English? Yeah, you know, whatever. And, you know, I got more work and I got full-time quite quickly. Well, not quickly, but I did get full-time and all the rest of it. But that sort of almost that informalism about FE, I mean, it can be a real problem for sure, but it is a great strength. And, you know, at the time I was looking at, well, if I went to do a PGCE, you know, would I get a bursary? Maybe not. How would it work? I think anyone looking outside, it looks very difficult to get into education. And if you are used to earning, you do have a family and stuff. I know there's now schemes that, like, you know, get career changes into schools, but I do think that's something that, as an industry and all phases of education, probably need to sort of like make it look a bit easier to get into, or make the routes clearer, because there's so many different routes and you sort of like just trying to negotiate your way through. But I mean, for me, I think most people in FE, it's not the first place they end up. I don't think. So I do think we're used to it. You know, we're used to people coming in from outside. You know, I mean, my first job interview, they kept talking about level 2 and level 3 qualifications. And I sort of like went, what? And they sort of explained it, and then I thought, I'm still not entirely sure, so I'm just going to not ask again. But you know, it is that sort of environment where you can sort of like feel your way through in a way. But you know, there's that flexibility, isn't there? You know,
I love the idea of you peddling your wares. This idea of, oh yeah, I could definitely do that. That essentially is an experience that we have in FE, because I think if you're contracted to a fractional contract, and this is another topic that I would really love to unpick, is
sort of have to.
It's like, right, well, we've got another 2 hours, so how about you teach EPQ? Let's do EPQ. And you go, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then you're like, oh, by the way, what's your degree in? We can do you could do an A-level in that, or maybe you want to do tutorial. And all of a sudden you're teaching lots of different topics and lots of different subjects until you get to the contract that you necessarily want to be at. So that's been really helpful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dan. It's been really nice having somebody on the show chatting through these ideas with me. We've got a couple of questions if you're happy to go through them. The first one is from Noreen. So, hi Noreen. I've no real experience of teaching in FE. Talking about accountability though, how much interaction do you have with your FE governors? So Dan, what do you think? How much interaction do you have with your FE governors?
The governors themselves, I've personally never had any direct contact with the governors. I mean, I did have a role where I was had a management position within maths and English, but I was producing things for, say, the vice principals to then communicate to the governors. So that governors thing is very much only on a senior level. And, I know schools are big, but like the FE college I work at is huge. And I think a lot of them are. So that is very much on a sort of very, senior SLT kind of level. I know there's often sort of things where you have like link governors with departments and they come round and have a chat and that kind of thing. But in terms of any sort of real, like that is very much the senior level kind of stuff. But yeah, I did have to spend a lot of time producing projected results and, this sort of stuff for them, but I didn't directly do that myself. But, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, absolutely. I have similar experience though from a large FE college. I've been at that same college since 2009, so I've been there quite a while. And the first time I met any of our governors was 3 weeks ago. And it was very much as a response to the new manager. So we've had a new principal over the last, I say new, is he still new if he's been there for 2 years? I'm not sure he counts as new anymore, but he's been there and he's wanting to instigate a lot of changes, and one of them was about having this connection between the SLT and the teachers and the support staff around all of the different areas of our college. And so that idea of how much interaction do you have with FE governors, if you'd have asked me last September, I wouldn't have been even able to tell you their names. I wouldn't have known how many we had. I wouldn't have known anything about our governing body. Now I know a little bit more. I've connected with them. We've had a meeting. It was online. So again, small caveat, it's not really that interaction, but it's an interesting one, isn't it? That the level of involvement of the governors, because I'm sure they're involved. I'm sure they're active participants within the SLT or with the SLT, but certainly not with teachers. And I imagine with other school settings that might be very different. Noreen, please feel free to respond to that. So if your experience has been different, then let us know what that one's been like. Then a couple of points from Mel, and then we're going to have to finish. Can't quite believe it. I was a little bit nervous about filling a 90-minute slot. I wasn't convinced I was going to be able to fill a 90-minute slot, but here we are nonetheless. So one of the things that we've mentioned about having uniforms and that being a good thing about being an FE, that you don't necessarily have to enforce it, but Mel quite rightly has pointed out, and especially at our site, that some of the subject areas do have a uniform. So for example, our hair and beauty department are expected to dress in a certain way, because again, it's that transition from you're not just a student, you are a professional, you need to be presented as a professional, and they have a working salon. So we do have clients coming in to the college setting for our students not to practice on. That doesn't necessarily feel fair, because these are a certain level. It's not as if they're just taking scissors or hair trimmers and then they're bald as they leave, but there's an image to perpetuate. Similarly, I know that the drama department, so the creative media department, I feel sure it's got a much catchier title than that. They're expected to dress in a certain way that's going to support their presentation of their subjects. Public services, often a lot of the staff in public services wear a uniform. So if they've come from an army background, they still wear their army gear. And I think it's quite interesting, because being in such a big setting, one of the reasons to join FE is because it is huge. And as Dan, who's chatted with us today, has already mentioned, that you can fit in lots of different areas within a college. So if you've got a skill set and you've got that teaching qualification, there's a place for you in FE. So when you have this vast space full of different people, it's quite nice to be able to identify people based on the uniform they're wearing and which department they're from. You know, you can look at the travel and tourism students. They've got their little neckerchiefs on. I'm sure there's a better word for it than that. And they look the professional part, and maybe again that's going to help support some of those low level behaviors, that we give these learners this respect because they are entering a professional world. But that, bizarrely enough, is all we have time for. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining me today. I really appreciate the insights that you've shared with us. It's been a real pleasure having you on. I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Yes, thank you.
And even if you can't say that you're not mega busy, maybe we could claim this was CPD or networking or something along those. So it's not a complete waste of your Friday.
I mean, look, this has meant I've not done something else, and I'm very grateful for it. But I will probably have to return to doing it at some point now.
Is it going to be marking? Is it marking that you're really
marking,
grateful?
Yeah, there's always marking. It's one of those things that's really important to do, but I've always got something I'd rather do.
Yeah, this is way more fun. I share that experience with you a lot. So thank you so much for giving up your time. Thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to repeating this next week. So next Friday lunchtime is when you're next going to hear from me. But that's it for now. Have a happy weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.